Welcome to Caregiving Out Loud and What the Experts Say. Today we're talking to P.K. Bevel, a woman with a lot of impressive degrees. But more importantly than her education, you'll discover the underlying force behind all of her work has been simply love. Psychologist, elder care mediator, end-of-life doula, and the recipient of many prestigious awards, there's no real title that explains the journey that has led her to create such innovative solutions for the aging and their families. Today, we'll be hearing about one of her most amazing inventions, the Virtual Dementia Tour, for which she received the Invisible Disabilities Innovation Award. But first, let's start at the beginning and find out how a little girl with polio grew up to be one of the industry's leading innovators. So, PK, what strikes me about extraordinary people is that they all have a passion and a curiosity. The passion almost always comes from a personal story, and the curiosity is what takes them on their journey of finding out how they can make the most difference. Because, there's so many facets to this industry. So you mentioned in one of your presentations that I watched that you had polio as a child. So your passion also came from a painful personal experience. Tell us a little bit about what that was like for you.
Sure. I think that the polio had created almost a PTSD in me. Back then in the mid 50s, that was not a term that was used. But I always have, since the polio, learning how to walk again, learning how to move again, being separate from any friends and school and stuff for quite some time, learning how to do a reentry yourself into all of those things set me up for being very empathic towards what is considered the least of these.
And what age were you?
I was 5 when I had polio.
And when you did your reentry?
Yes. And then after I was able to walk again and able to get involved in things again, it was a new journey. Learning how to overcome those kinds of barriers was something I learned very early. My parents moved about every 3 years as well. My father was associated with the military. So that skill of learning how to blend in and learning how to figure out where my avenues were was also, and again, in every situation, I was drawn to the people who didn't quite fit in with everybody else.
So keeping vulnerable populations like seniors in decline
that's
and
exactly
those
right.
whose needs need to be understood, for them to have a quality of life is important to you to keep them from being marginalized.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So creating a process where people can stand in another person's shoes when it came to experiencing what it's like to have Alzheimer's was like a natural conclusion, to come to based on your own experience as a child.
Right. And that's exactly, you summed it up very beautifully. That's exactly what happened. I started serving seniors in 1983, and it was, based specifically on love. That's pretty much it. So I fell in love with them. They were my people. This is my Calcutta, to use Mother Teresa's statement. I then was very action oriented to try to figure out the best way to serve them. I ran up against a terrible wall pretty quickly, in that some people just really don't know how to care for people living with dementia. So learning how to help them created the training services that I had for so many years. But
But you
Lee,
were also a caregiver, PK. So you know what it's like
later,
firsthand. Tell us about
much
that.
later, much later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Daddy had vascular dementia. Mother died in 2005. And I sort of became his, not sort of, I became his, I would call me a lookout back then. Um, Doctor's appointments, watching how he was, his grief journey, all of those things. In the last 4 years of his life, we built an apartment for him in our house, and he lived with us those last 4 years. And there's nothing that could have trained me for what that stress, anticipatory grief, all the things that go with it. I remember when I would go down to check on Dad every morning, my heart rate accelerating, my palms being sweaty, the fear that I'm going to find him in the situation was palatable. Palatable. Can't get it out. And that did not go away
Mm-hmm.
until he was gone. And even after that, of course, the trauma of all of that. But yes, I did have uh, an up close and personal view of what that's like. And vascular
Yeah.
dementia is so different.
How?
How? Because vascular dementia, they can do some things super, super well, as though there's no problem, and then other things they can't do very well at all. You're off balance all the time. So if he did this okay, why can't he do this okay? Well,
Mm-hmm.
the dynamics of the disease are causing TIAs to happen, transient ischemic attacks, small strokes, to
Mm-hmm.
happen in their brain, which are killing cells. And
Mm-hmm.
when that happens, then all of a sudden they can't do that, but they can still do this. It's a
So it's a
it's a
moving
tough one.
target.
Yeah.
Well, you are also an end of life doula. Most of us avoid even having a conversation about death. And both of my coaches are grief counselors, among other things, and one is also an end of life doula. So tell me why that is so special to you.
Following the same logic of the trajectory of my career in caregiving, it makes sense that I would want to kind of close out part of my career with the end of life. We do a lot, as you do, with regards to caring for people with dementia, but we had nothing for end of life care. So I feel like my experience has been that a lot of people living with dementia die alone because people don't understand what's been happening with them, and they've not been able to connect with them during the advanced dementia stage. So I've developed a program where I help people understand why it's different, the death is, and developed what I call an empathic transitions kit for families to use and caregivers to use to try to create that engagement. That engagement at the end, not. I'm not talking about imminent death here. To me, when we're caring for dementia at the end of life, there's two stages. There's the advanced dementia care, which carries with it a whole cadre of things, characteristics, and then there's imminent death. So that requires two different skill sets. And once the doulas can develop a relationship with the person with whatever form of dementia they have, when it comes to imminent death and vigiling, they're better equipped to know what that person's going to deal with, and they're better equipped to help the family know how to go through that end of life.
And how
So
is that different from what hospice does?
the concern that I have is that for the first time in history, hospice is admitting more people with neurodiversity, cognitive decline, than cancer. So they're going to need to learn how to figure this out pretty quick. And of course, we know that even attending physicians, they're dealing more and more with this kind of thing, sans hospice. So now we know don't we? That when someone is dying with another disease, they can tell us what they want. They can talk
Mhm.
about their legacy. They can get all. People with dementia can't do that. It's a whole
Mhm.
the whole atmosphere is different around them. So that's the journey right there.
When do you get involved? Do you get involved, like hospice does 6 months prior to death, or do you get involved just at the end, or
I get involved
what?
whenever they call me in. So other times I have been called in, usually at late mid stage dementia, and you know where that is. That's they're getting non-ambulatory, increased falls. Uh, the communication skills are becoming difficult. Word salad, expressive aphasia, and receptive aphasia, and they're having trouble even feeding themselves. They're still swallowing, but they're having trouble feeding themselves, so they're getting assistance. I have a whole list of things that advance dementia. That's usually when I like to get involved.
I
And
know, I have it
and
right here. I downloaded it from your presentation.
excellent, excellent. There you have it. So that's usually when I feel like a doula needs to be involved.
Mhm,
Prior to that, of course, they're getting good caregiving. They're able to communicate pretty well. They're
mhm,
moving around, but I like to get them when they're having behavioral challenges and when they're
mhm.
just not able to cope with the day.
And are you teaching this also?
Yes,
That's great. That's great.
it's
And
so important.
you are certified in elder care mediation.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what kinds of things that you encounter and why you wanted to get into that.
Uh, I absolutely positively love working with families in distress. I just do. As a clinical psychologist, it just has fascinated me from the very beginning. There is no such thing as a normal family. There just isn't. And
Well, I have a quote about that. Mary Carr said, "A dysfunctional family is a family with more than one person in it."
oh, Lee, that's perfect. That's perfect. And it's true. It's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
And you throw mama or daddy in the mix, and you just have a whole huge firestorm going. So, I got trained in family therapy and all that kind of stuff, and specialized a little bit in it in graduate school. But I really felt like what that was teaching me was, if I'm in therapy with a family for like several years over a what you and I deal with are families that are in crisis, and decisions have to be made. And some are in and some are out. And there are all these different dynamics going on. So I decided that because the issues that you and I deal with are so elder care focused, that it would be good for me to learn from a mediation standpoint how to best be equipped with those dynamics,
Mhm,
learning how to caucus, learning how to present things in a negotiating way, how
mhm,
to how to come up with an action plan, how
mhm,
to and see, sometimes in family therapy we don't do that. We let that be organic. In this
mhm.
type of therapy that you and I are doing, interventions that you and I are doing are far more intense. um, we have a short period of time to try to come to a conclusion, and then we have a longer period of time trying to mediate some of the issues, and then we get to the end, and we better have all our ducks in a row and be prepared for that
Right,
last
right.
stand.
So what I what my goal is in my work is to hopefully one day change this status quo where people are not planning long term care in the emergency room, you know? that it's not
Yeah,
crisis driven and they're going from one crisis to another, where they're
exactly.
planning in advance. And that's my goal, is so
Yes.
that they can plan in advance. And when they do that, this reduces so much of the conflict and creates an environment that in what I do, I've got a lot of like you developed an experiential process, where you can stand when someone can stand in another's shoes that has Alzheimer's. I've got several processes like that in what I do during the conversation, and whether or not everybody participates fully or not. And there was one woman who, she was actually a project manager in the Army, and she had been estranged from her father for 30 years. And she had lots of
Oh,
daddy issues. And she, they let her know that her father was in the hospital and it wasn't good. And she decided she would just drop by just for a minute, just to see and just to say hello, and that's it. And when she came to the hospital, she it just an extraordinary thing happened after working together, because she had a lot of issues come up. She had a lot of anxiety, a lot of conflict with her family. And after working together, she ended up becoming his caregiver.
perfect.
And so it was an extraordinary healing. And from what I call the guiding principles, of love and acceptance, compassion, empathy, and service to the family, and kind of being able to show people how to enact those, you know, um, it, it it's just a magical thing that happens, in a family. It's really extraordinary.
It really is. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So, and let's talk about what you have created, because we sort of mentioned it, but tell us specifically, what you have created with this virtual dementia tour, and where all this has led.
Well, it's a miracle. Is what it is. Because I donated it to our nonprofit that I founded in '97.
Mhm.
So I had been struggling from '97 until about 2005, keeping the nonprofit afloat. People were not donating to make dreams come true, and I was just having a tough time convincing people that this was a worthy endeavor. So I was about to give up and went to graduate school, and my dissertation was surround the dissertation was based on what ticked me off in long term care, and that was I could do in services all day long, and everybody would go back and do exactly what they had been doing before because they didn't
Mhm.
understand. And I had to wrap my head around the fact that, well, how would I expect them to really know how to care for a person with Alzheimer's with no information? They have no reference point. And so they're just doing what they do based on little or no knowledge, and that's not their fault.
Right.
So I became
That's
very
what
committed to
caregiving is
trying,
about.
pardon me?
Typically that's the way caregiving in general is about.
Right, right, exactly. So, yeah, so it took 2 years, but I came up with, based on how the brain dies, the things that
Mhm.
cause the behavioral output due to the cell death in the brain. And then I had to figure out how to trick a normal brain into thinking that they were living with some of this. I studied everything from the amount of time they're in the experience room to how I place things in the experience room. Um, Based on all those studies, then it was published, and I never really expected it to go anywhere else. And then some
And you
of the
patented
place,
this.
pardon?
And you patented this process.
Yeah. So I kept getting calls from some of the places I did the pilot in and asked me to come back and conduct what I did before. So that's what led to the launch. Now, since then, the virtual dementia tour has been changed in many ways. The more we study and the more we learn about what's happening in the brain and how we can reproduce that. And again, we're highly researched and continue to be at the highest level of evidence based training. I just feel scared when we try to simulate dementia and it's not based on rigorous study of how that relates to how the brain dies.
Can they experience this at home? I know that you were working on an app, or do they have to go someplace?
Yeah, I'm pretty firm on they have to go someplace. We have a family edition though, where
Mhm.
they can purchase that edition and take it home to the place where they're caring for the person. It's pretty extensive, but they can pass it on to other family members. Actually, that was featured in a Broadway play a couple of years ago. They used it to make the connection. It was pretty incredible. My husband cried. He was
Aw.
so moved. But the
What was
family
the name of
edition,
the
though, is for
play?
them. Dot DOT, and it was written by Coleman Domingo, who is a pretty famous actor now.
Mhm.
And he, what a delightful man. He called and asked for permission, flew me up there, and had me do a after some of the Broadway plays, they have an intensive where a person can speak. David Hyde Pierce and I did a thing for the audience afterwards, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, so now the VDT, we have a hospital edition, we have
Mm.
retail, we have TSA, we have all kinds of iterations, and
Mhm.
it's in 20 countries now, nine
It's
languages.
amazing.
And I know God takes care of drunks and fools, and here we go.
There's
Um,
about didn't I believe I read in your bio that there's about 4.5 million people that have gone through this program?
yeah, yeah. That's an estimation, obviously, but it's based on some pretty good numbers.
Mhm.
It's in South Africa now, so I should say 21 countries.
Mhm.
And we usually, when we open up a new country, we fly one of our experienced people there to help set it up and make sure it runs right so that we're continuing with the evidence based model no matter the culture. We've also had it studied by universities in other countries to make sure that the information that we have in
Mhm.
the manual and the pre and post survey actually translate correctly. So the universities in the different countries take care of that.
So how long is the experience?
The whole thing,
The part where they're experiencing what it's like to feel like they have Alzheimer's, how long is that take?
um, well, after studying how the brain interprets information, it takes your normal brain approximately 8 minutes to absorb what it's actually going through in a traumatic situation and then begin to interpret and determine what you're going to do next. So I studied it at 6, 8, 10, and 12 minutes over the course of years. And 8 is the money shot. That's when they're going to either make the connection or they're not.
Mhm.
Anything
Mhm.
earlier than that, the connection doesn't really get made well. 10 minutes is perfect. But we find that 8 minutes, we're right on the money.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So, when you follow up with these families who've gone through the dementia tour, what do you hear back from them? I mean, how has it changed, how they interact with their loved one?
Right. I'm more patient. I understand more why he's doing what he's doing. Now, during the debrief with families, we try to do that family by family. That
Mhm,
way, it's not in a group. Sometimes that's not possible, but the best way is to meet with that family, and from that we find out what they're dealing with. You know, not only by asking the question, "How was this experience for you? What struck you?" Da da da. Da. We also say, "So what brings you here today?" So when
mhm,
we ask that question, we're going to kind of get a sense of where they're coming from. And then as I begin talking about what the experience was designed to do, I relate it back to their loved one. And
mhm,
then by the end of the session, we all determine whether or not we're going to need additional resources. So
mhm,
we have a resource list for them, and then of course, Second Wind is there to support them in any way that they need. Yeah.
mhm,
So the most
mhm.
common thing is, for those who have lost a loved one, it's "I wish I had known." So the response to that is, "But you've done this in honor of them, so you've actually taken a leap towards that loving component that you had." And
I
then
think that's part
for
of healing.
yeah, yeah. And then for those who are going through it now, lots of tears, lots of comments about, I'm going to do better. How are you? Then my question is, so tell me what that means. What does that look like to you? And they usually tell me, well, I need to be more patient. And when she's asking me the same thing over and over again, which is what I did in the room, I need to
Right.
understand that that's her saying to me, I need support. I need you to love me. I'm a little scared. So, we,
This is so important, and just, to have someone who actually cares to begin with,
right,
understands, and takes the time, to deepen their understanding so that they can, create a better quality of life and a better
right,
interaction.
right. And I'm sure you do the same. That's just how we roll, right, Lee?
So, what changes have you seen just in the industry, in terms of care awareness since you started?
Well, remember I started in 83, so the changes have been tremendous.
Yeah.
The I think for me, I think I know in our field we are very concerned about creating more awareness of what's going on. But personally, I think we're doing an outstanding job. For the first time in history, we are talking about this stuff.
Mhm.
We are reading about this stuff. Newspapers are covering information about this. Social media is on the chain now. Um,
And what about in the actual dementia care units? Have you seen a lot of change
yeah,
there
Yeah,
in nursing
in
homes?
some cases, yeah, in some cases the changes are really good. In other cases, as typical for any field, they got a long way to go. But
Mhm,
the improvement has been great. We have activity professionals who are now well trained.
mhm.
Again, in some cases, and in other cases, not. I've been in both ends of the spectrum, even just as recently as this past month. Um,
And the more the caregiving family is aware and they
yes,
express what their expectations are, of
that's right.
care, and they start asking, that will
They
help to
do.
change things too.
And that was one of the points that I see not only in long term care, but also in hospitals. They are really looking to the families for more information. They didn't used to do that.
Mm,
Um,
mm, mhm,
and helping the families kind of along the journey, starting to realize that without these family support, they're kind of at a loss. Not only that, but the family brings a significant amount of caregiving opportunity if they'll just take the time to listen and help them understand best ways to take
Right.
care of things so that they're not sent to the hospital every time something happens. Um,
Right. There's so many blind spots without communication.
that's a great way to put it. It's a great way to put it. Yeah.
So why do companies need to pay attention to the aging population?
Why do companies need to pay attention? Because their employees are dealing with loved ones who are experiencing some dementia or cognitive decline, and they don't know what to do. To
Mhm.
me, that's a huge place that our field is trying to break through. It's tough. We do the VDT for LexisNexis and for a number of large corporations who are taking a sensitive stance, but that's just been in the last since the pandemic.
Mhm.
Um, Bell South, Honda, places like that are embracing the virtual dementia tour and some of the training programs that we have that go with it, but
Mhm.
not near enough. And
Right.
what's interesting is when we do the VDT for these large corporations, and we have the debrief, we do what's called a rolling debrief. And this is sometimes more effective than, just even one on one. But it's when the participant comes through, we debrief them, and then another participant comes through, and I'm still debriefing, and they get the tail end, and they're told at the beginning they can stay as long as they want, or they can leave when they feel like they've heard enough. What comes out of that are family members who are there who have not even talked to the rest of the team about what's going on at home.
Mhm.
And they're in a safe space. We create an environment for that debrief in corporate settings that's a little different than anywhere else so that they feel loved and supported. And boy, a lot of stuff comes out of those. And from an HR perspective,
Mhm.
it's a boom. It's great. Now
Sharing
from
is so important. Um, I have a part in my courses where in the workbook that says if I only knew. So if people share their if I only knews, then those are key things that, you know, it- you don't have to be isolated. You don't have to be just so shut down in this experience. And sharing this is is so helpful and so healing. Caregivers, as you know, can be so isolated.
oh yes, yes, and they're afraid to talk about it a lot of
Right.
times. That's one of the Yeah, I wrote a blog about that. About it's partially the family's fault because when they're isolated like that, they need to feel they are supported, but they're the ones that have to reach out because the other people are scared to death to intervene because they don't know what's the right thing to do. So,
Well, people don't know what to say. It's like your friends drop off because
right,
after a while, it's like, you know, what are you going to say?
right, right.
And so they just stop communicating. And so, it's very easy
Yeah,
for a caregiver to lose their friends, to lose their job, I mean, it's devastating, can be.
it is. It is. Yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to talk about a little bit about how our work overlaps, because I thought that would be fun. Because as I watched your uh, presentations, I could see my own version of what you were doing, in different
Like minds.
areas. So I have a course called The Conversation, and there's a process called the wider truth. And what that process is, I mean, even in families, you have to be careful that no one is marginalized in the
Mm.
decision making.
Right.
And so in that process, and so the exercise is to show how even the quietest member has something valuable to offer that's an important piece of the puzzle. So it's not just the experienced, the most successful, who are driving the process. And the other part is for them to see that each one holds a piece of the puzzle. You know, so each one has only one perspective and it's their own, and they need each other to see the whole truth. I mean, each person is looking at the family and looking at the loved one in a different way, and has that kernel that helps them to make good decisions together. So that marginalization can happen even in the family. Well, a lot of times the quietest person ends up being the caregiver,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. And
That's right.
and I found
Mhm.
that, you know, as the caregiver, you are taking the most responsibility, and you have to just practice accepting that with no expectations of anyone, you know, to just say, um, allow each one to come to the table in their own time, in their own way,
Right.
because the expectations always cause conflict. That's where the conflict comes in my experience.
Yeah.
And it's a process. I mean, it doesn't happen, you know, in one meeting or
No.
anything.
No.
It's really a question of kind of quietly leading. My background is construction and manufacturing, and so I have a big project management,
Yeah.
orientation. And so I've kind of built
Cool.
my system around project management principles. And so what I try to do is to get them to focus on the solution, not how they're feeling, you know?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so what I work with a framework and a process, a methodology, and some simple tools like checklists and things like that, so that they can go through a process, and this system acts like kind of a third party. So it doesn't become so
Perfect.
personal. As long as
Yeah.
they agree in the beginning, let's just follow the format. Then
Right.
they have a checklist of how to make a good decision. Does it meet this criteria? Does it meet that criteria?
Yeah.
And they just go through
Perfect.
this process. And pretty soon, they feel a sense of accomplishment and they feel a sense of teamwork.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
it's 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 an amazing process to see how. I remember one person in our pilot, he felt so resentful and alone in his caregiving, and he was a coach. And after the conversation course, he realized that there was one person who never did anything, you know, and he was upset with that person. And so, but after he looked at what value they brought, this person always made the parent laugh. And so what their job was to call them once a day and just to have a conversation and make them laugh. And he brought humor, and that's the only thing he
Excellent.
did, but it was huge. And then he was appreciated for it
It is you.
instead of,
Sure.
people being
Sure.
mad that he wasn't doing anything. So it's just
Right.
it's
Right.
amazing what can
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. And they want something to do, for the most part.
Sure.
Um, you got to figure out what's going to work best for them and let them make that decision.
Absolutely.
It's it's a delicate dance in these families, and
Yeah.
uh, honoring that dance is part of what you and I do frequently with these families, because there's no, I tell them all the time, there's no right or wrong answer here. We're just going to do the best. Um, we're going to do the best decision making we can. And I usually in my family, I wouldn't call it therapy, but my family sessions, unless it's on Zoom, obviously, um, is I use the empty chair technique, where I have a chair with the sign on it, with the loved one's name, so that we can constantly talk about getting back to her.
Right. The
What
reason why
are
they're all there.
Right, right. And when conflict happens and I start to caucus, before I caucus, I try not to, because that is separating, but sometimes it gets too volatile. But in the situation where I can talk it down a little bit so everybody stays together, I say, let's focus on this mother sitting here in this chair listening to all of this, and
Hmm.
let's start focusing on her for a moment, and let's just
Hmm.
take some deep breaths, and let's think about her, get her in your mind. And sometimes I don't even have to caucus at all, if they'll calm down.
We do a process. It's a little closed eye meditation before each meeting, and it's called emptying your cup. And so you empty your cup, you close your eyes, and you let go of the text that you feel like you need to send. You let go of what you got to do next after the meeting, or something that just happened, or the argument you had, or the child you have to pick up, and you just surrender it, you know, so that you come to the meeting completely in the present moment.
It's interesting you say that. When I'm working with end of life doulas, especially, of course, our family caregivers as well, but especially for the end of life doulas, we have a training portion that's called Setting Your Intention.
Mhm.
And what it basically is what you're saying. You're just using different words, and it is the 4x4 breathing technique. And I teach them how to create a sacred word that's a word that only they know and use, and they use that at the beginning of the 4x4. And
Mhm.
eventually, as it has for me and many others, eventually I get to where I can be outside of the room right before a
Mhm.
session or right before meeting with an advanced dementia patient, and say that sacred word in my mind, relax my body,
Mm,
and let everything go, and set my intention for love and peace and empathy.
right.
And then I can walk in. So it's the same kind of
Yeah,
thing, and it's extremely important.
it is. It's so important to just do everything you can and surrender, you know? So, one of the things that struck me in your presentation, that was interesting, that I kind of do, is talk about the new normal and workarounds. And you talked about do more of what works and less of what doesn't work. And,
Right.
you know, I put signs up on my father's rooms, so he would not get confused about where he was. And
Sure.
that was a workaround. And I like to hear caregivers' workarounds so that they can share them with each other. But I kind of think about it, PK, like more like, and I heard this in what you were saying too. I like to think of it like a broken arm, instead of thinking of them as sick and,
Right.
dying. I like to think, okay, they have a broken arm today. What would I do to compensate for that broken arm? Now,
Right.
tomorrow we may have to create another new normal,
That's
because
right.
you have to compensate in a different way. But
That's right. That's right.
compensating means that you're creating a place where you can have a normal family interaction with that person and they can feel
Yeah.
normal.
Right.
They like to feel normal.
Yeah.
I mean,
So many families
I
don't
walked
know.
in one day in my father's nursing home room. His roommate had Parkinson's,
Mm.
and um, his wife was so good at this. She was sitting there with her feet up, watching TV, eating a snow cone. And he was laying there reading the paper, like just on the Sunday afternoon, as if they were on the back porch in Georgia, right?
Oh, oh,
And the only thing was he was reading the paper upside down.
of course. That's okay.
That's okay. And that was their normal. And it was
Sure.
beautiful.
Yeah. 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 The adjustment that families frequently have to make when a loved one is actually living with them or in a nursing home or wherever. And by the way, since dementia is terminal, and it is, um, families need to realize that they can call on hospice sooner than they think and palliative care
Absolutely.
sooner than they think.
Absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't know that. And I didn't know anything about hospice, and I love hospice. And I called them 1 week before my father died because I didn't
Oh,
know.
no. That people need to realize that. Um, and for palliative care, you don't have to have a doctor's order. You have to have a doctor's order for
Mhm, mhm.
hospice, but palliative care, you don't. And so many hospices are so good about creating waivers because people with dementia, sometimes they don't go in 6 months.
Mhm.
And
Right.
sometimes they rally and look great for a little while, and then they slump
But then
back
you can
a little
renew
bit
it.
lower than they were. Yeah. So good hospices understand this and
Right.
know how to create
They're
those
wonderful.
waivers, and the attending physicians are well trained to do that. But that's a rarity, and that's very sad. Rotating a person in and off of hospice isn't good for the family, and it's not good for the elder either.
Yeah.
After people die, that's not the end of what I think a doula should be doing. It's you need to get them in touch with the
I
right
love hearing
bereavement
that.
groups, the right
I love hearing
support
that.
groups. You have to. Um, when I was trained as an end of life doula, I was trained by a nurse, a hospice nurse,
Mhm.
and she
Ah,
didn't recommend staying too involved with the family. She felt like the hospice would continue to do that and things like that. And I heartily disagree. Um, if you are there at the time of death, you have a
mhm.
bond with that family that's unlike any other bond. And it's up to
Yeah.
you because that family's going to be asking questions after it's over. And you are the only one that can help interpret what exactly happened. And leaving that unsaid and untreated, I think, can create a whole lot more problems. But yeah,
I think it's so important too. A lot of times they want to over medicate someone who's dying and so that they're not really present. And I just don't agree with that. Um, you know, my father, I mean, I remember his eyes being just open. I mean, I had never seen anyone die before. So I didn't know what to expect. And his eyes were completely open. But I went over to him, because I felt him slipping away. It was like he had one foot in both worlds. And I went over to him and I whispered to him and I said, "Daddy, I love you so much and I'm so proud of you. And it's okay." And he blinked several times and his mouth started moving. And even in that state, I could feel him, you know, that he knew
sure.
that I was there and he was even trying to communicate. and he died 15 minutes later. That was such a precious time. I
That's
just hate to see
beautiful,
it
though.
if anybody over medicates a person who's dying.
The only time
Unless they're in pain.
there you go. And people with dementia can't tell us they're in pain. They just
True.
can't. So we have to be good detectives and
Right.
watch for those pain indicators.
Right.
And so often a family will say to me, well, but she looks like she's at peace. Well, her hands are clenched. She's moving around in the bed a lot.
Yeah.
She is
You know what to look
rubbing her
for.
head back and forth. Now I don't argue with them. I just say, well, let's all take a look at her right now and tell me what you think. And of course, then that's when I kind of guide them. And because I really, really
That's
hate
so important.
the thought that a person with dementia is going to
Yeah.
die in pain because
Yes.
people are scared to give them the medication.
You know, I was thinking about family dynamics and how, especially under stress, all of these, you know, triggers for old patterns and unresolved resentments. And, you know, I mean, I call caregiving going back home. You know, it's almost like the family has Alzheimer's. They're living in the past. They're trying to function in the present, and they have no concept of the future. And so it's like, this is just like Alzheimer's.
Everything from taking them to the doctor to where the doctor is talking to you and not the patient. I don't care how debilitated or loss of cognitive functioning there is. I absolutely hate that.
Yeah.
And see, there's a lot of those kinds of things that happen that will make it so hard for the family. For instance, I got to where, and I help families do this,
Mhm.
where when I took dad to the doctor, or now I take any patient to the doctor, when the doctor's talking and keeps looking at me, I get up and I stand right next to the loved one with my
Mhm.
head almost right next to them so that that person's getting honored.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
discount them all the time as family
Yes.
members. And we can't help it. We don't really know much better. But to your point, there's just so much that we forget when we're trying to care for them simply because we're dealing with this at the moment and it's so many dynamics going on. You know, you
I'm so
take your
happy
loved
you
one
said
to the
that.
doctor and you take the patient to the doctor or loved one to the doctor. Well, you've had to take time off work. You've probably missed lunch. You have them in a wheelchair. You're in and out of the car with a wheelchair. You're lifting, you're pulling,
Right.
you're getting inside. Then you're sitting in a waiting room with someone who's confused to keep saying, why am I here? Why am I here?
Mhm.
Or negative
And hopefully
comments
there's
about
no
other people in the
accident.
waiting room. I mean, the list goes on. So, see, you got to keep all
Yeah,
this
yeah.
going on as a
Yeah.
caregiver. It's
And
just so hard.
also, you know, I give them a questions to ask the doctor checklist.
Of
Okay?
course.
Because they're basic things. And a lot of times, you know, you may say, well, this is obvious. I know how to do this. Yes. But everything you do is always under stress and emotional. And so you
Oh,
get out of the doctor's
yeah.
office and you go, oh, darn, I didn't ask them that, you know? And if you just have a
Right.
simple checklist, then you go through it. In a way that you can involve your loved one is by saying, you know, Daddy, do you have any other complaints or, you know, things that
Right.
you've observed? Just, you know, to include them. And it's important.
Uh-huh.
It's important. So one thing that I loved was your story about the cup holder. I wanted you to share that for our listeners.
Sure. It is a big one. So there have been a lot of dreams that have come true that have over the years that have colored the reality of what our elders are going through. And you know, the goal of making a dream come true is obviously to make the elder feel important and lifted up and and looking at their needs from a dream perspective. Because a dream for them is not like a dream for us. If I need a cup holder for a wheelchair, I just run to Walmart and I grab something and I do it. They can't do that anymore. So it becomes a dream. So that was his dream. And the reason he wanted the cup holder for his wheelchair was so that he could get out of his room. He suffered from a terrible disease where his kidneys were not functioning well, and he needed to be hydrated to the maximum. And if he didn't, he was going to have to be considered for dialysis. He didn't want to have to do that. So he was scared to be without, hydration. So, I thought, well, why the heck can't he get one? So I checked with social services and they said, well, it's not paid for by Medicare and he doesn't have any money. And so I went to, those supply places where you can get durable medical equipment, either rented or purchase it, wheelchairs, walkers, things like that. And I thought, I bet they've got one. So it's so cute because I went in there, and this is what happens when we make dreams come true. When we go to management and say, hey, look, I got this guy, and you explain the situation to him. Before you know it, they're donating 5 cup holders to the wheelchair. You don't have to pay a thing. And, 9 times out of 10, that's exactly what happens. That we get so blessed with people who just, once they know this is a need, they make it happen. So gave him the cup holder for the wheelchair. We made a big deal out of it, bought him some really cool cups to fit in there, and it was adjustable. And so, this man was high as a kite. Do you know that he started coming out of his room and going to activities? Eventually, he was president of the resident council because he got so involved. And this sounds
incredible.
So tiny, but it's huge. All of the dreams are just huge.
Incredible.
And I think one of our responsibilities that we have is to try to, again, as with the VDT, place ourselves in their shoes. What if you couldn't get that cup holder for a wheelchair? You would be isolated for the rest of your life. That's how your days would end.
Absolutely.
And that's just wrong.
Well, I would like to end with one of my favorite quotes. Robert Brough said, enjoy the little things, for one day you may look back and realize that they were the big things.
Oh.
And that's what that
beautiful.
Cup holder made me think about.
That's right. It was a big thing.
Yeah. So I want to thank you, PK, for sharing what you do and why you do it and how we can all get better at caregiving. And I think, like I know you do, that the bottom line is love.
It is. Thank you for the honor of being with you today.
Thank you, PK.